Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. This is our encore edition from our recent end of March Bangalore meetup. Coming back due to high demand, there were a number of questions that we were unable to address during the day. We spent 6 hours at Nutanix. We're very appreciative for them hosting and for their partnership. We look forward to answering a lot of your questions today. So let's get kicked off by first introducing some of the speakers. I'm Paul Davis. Again, I look after our go-to-market efforts, our users and customers across the Asia Pacific region, and we will be spending more time in India, a further update at the end of our time today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Derek. I'm a senior support engineer based in Singapore. Nice to meet you all.
Yeah, I'll go next. Johnny Mirza, just following up from our meeting in Bangalore, which was great. Just here with Derek and the team and Shiv to go through the Q&A. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So it was a great meetup at the Nutanix office previously, and we were happy to have so many questions. Like Paul said, we could answer whatever we could, but in the interest of time, we were left with some unanswered questions. And these are the questions you put up on the QR code. We have got them here with a great bunch of panelists. So let us know if you have any other questions while we go through them. But great to be here again, talking to the ClickHouse team as well as the ClickHouse users.
Great, thanks, Shiv. And that's a good reminder. If you do have additional questions throughout this session, please do just pop them into the Q&A chat. We'd be happy to address those async. But for now, why don't we get started with the questions that you've provided. I'll stop sharing my screen here. And the first question that we will have will be to Johnny. How do you simulate real-world workloads in testing environments to ensure ClickHouse meets performance expectations?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways. ClickHouse does provide its own benchmarking tool. It's part of the client library that you download anyway, so that you download the ClickHouse CLI, which comes with a benchmarking tool called ClickBench, which is quite powerful to be able to run and simulate your own data or some sample data to go through and execute queries against ClickHouse. And from that, you can see the benchmark latency results as well that you can use through ClickBench. Quite popular to be able to do that. You can see how long it takes, the P99 sort of concurrency, the rates that you get from a concurrency perspective as well. There's also an online sort of benchmarking test as well that you can see versus other databases as well, a comparison for different query types that have been run using the benchmark tool. You can bring your own data and you can load your own data into that tool as well, and then run query executions against that. So we'll share the slides. I'll share a link to ClickBench, and there's some really good examples on there as well to get started with.
Great,
that was good. No follow-ups. Yep.
Thanks, Johnny. We've got another one for you. Do you have any benchmarks on how the performance differs from reading tables?
Yeah, it was hard to understand the context of this one. So there's not really a specific benchmark from reading from S3. I'm guessing from S3 tables. So there's a couple of different ways. You can query S3 directly using just the standard S3 function to read the data in. Once you read that file, you can then go back through the system query log and then have a look at that execution time to see how long it took to read that file. Also, what you can do is an insert into select. So basically, you're reading that file and then you're pushing that into a ClickHouse table directly. And then you can query that table and also run a system query log test and see how long it took to run in ClickHouse. So you can kind of see both results to run some performance benchmarking tests from reading directly from S3 versus reading directly from ClickHouse. I think that's what the question was asking, but you can obviously also go back and see the compression difference once you have ingested that data into ClickHouse. You can see the compression difference of before and after, or compressed versus uncompressed from a particular S3 object. Not sure if there's anything else on that. I wasn't sure if it was related to ClickHouse Cloud and caching or reading directly from S3, but I think it was reading directly from S3 was the question.
Yep. Great. Thanks, Johnny. We've got another one here. Do the async inserts return an ACK to the insert before it is actually persisted, thereby becoming eventually consistent? Or do the ACKs wait until the data is actually persisted? Derek, could you help us with that?
Of course. So yes, by default, the async insert will return an ACK acknowledgement only after the data is persisted. However, you are free to turn this off, but we do not recommend that. So the setting that you need to watch out for is called wait_for_async_insert. It is enabled by default, and we recommend that you keep this as default. So we do have a wonderful blog post that talks about asynchronous insert. So feel free to check it out, and maybe my colleague can help paste that link in the chat.
Right. Thanks, Derek. As mentioned, that our query shouldn't be like querying from a single ID, but ClickHouse is also helping in one of the issues of multiple updates. So what would be a better approach? Should we keep using ClickHouse or switch to SQL? Johnny?
Yeah, looking at this question, I believe, and I think it was related to the slides that we were presenting on the actual meetup. And there's one particular slide that talks about the optimal query to run for ClickHouse and what is the best performance and what is ClickHouse sort of designed to do. And there's really three queries in there. When you want to run a select star from table, for example, or you want to select a specific row or a specific where filter on a particular column that you want to filter on. And then there's obviously running a large aggregation against a big group of data, which is ultimately where ClickHouse is the most performant. It's not so much that the other two approaches aren't efficient. They are still very efficient with ClickHouse, even when you want to select and run a row by row sort of view and filter on a particular ID or a particular key. They're still very efficient. They're just more efficient when it comes to running aggregations against large amounts of data that are all basically within one column, and it can find that column that lives in a file, and run a big average summary against that. But you can still do a select star from table and pull that data back. A lot of it depends on the order by key. If you're ordering by the timestamp, for example, you might want to filter on or sort by the latest records on there as well. But yeah, definitely you can do that. And I believe that's what the question was asking, but happy to follow up on that as well.
Great. Thanks, Johnny. And Derek, we've got another one for you. If we'd like to have multiple filters on various columns for a query, example, select average column 3 in table where column 1 equals value and column 2 is greater than value, would this work better with a row-oriented format?
Probably not. But I would like to clarify what a row-oriented format mean. I believe you are referring to databases that is of a row-oriented format. So I'll just comment on what ClickHouse would do in such circumstances. So first of all, based on the predicate, ClickHouse would retrieve the necessary granules. So it's best that you put column 1 and column 2 in your primary key so that ClickHouse would select the least amount of granules necessary to process the query. And after that, ClickHouse will only select column 3 after filtering out all the unnecessary granules to compute the average, which is the aggregation. So that's the step that ClickHouse would take. And with that, ClickHouse is going to be very performant because you remove all the other granules that is not necessary based on the predicate that you have put in. Column 1 and column 2 helps a lot. And then only focusing on column 3, which will run average on. So I'll put my bet on ClickHouse being faster in this case.
Great. Thanks, Derek. Johnny, we're coming back to you. What's the recommended way to store or query unstructured JSON data? Does ClickHouse have a native support for querying such data? As in, do we need to deserialize before reading the data within our application, or can we directly run queries to ClickHouse?
Okay. So how long do we have for this question? It's going to be a long one. Yeah, it's a very good question. I noticed that unstructured JSON data as well is in brackets as well. There's a few different ways and techniques for unstructured to query sort of JSON data, unstructured data in ClickHouse. And probably the best approach that I've found is using JSON to have maybe a semi-structured approach. You could take a semi-structured approach where some of the JSON is structured, but then you might have some nested fields that are unstructured or dynamic in nature. The whole JSON might be dynamic in nature as well. So there's really a couple of different approaches, and not all data, not all unstructured data is JSON as well. There's lots of text files that use regex extractions and capture groups and things like that, which are all supported as well. But when it comes to JSON, you can definitely use, there's a new JSON object type that's available. I know it says allow experimental, but it does work, and we do have customers that run that in production, especially for internal observability use cases. That's very good at parsing sort of JSON data and pulling out the columns from the JSON nested structure. But the other very common approach, which it works very well in ClickHouse, is even if you put that whole JSON structure into a single string, and then you start to use some of the functions in JSON, whether you're using views or materialized views, to dynamically extract that data from the JSON string, using JSON regex, JSON extract functions, for example. So they're really good ways of extracting and working with JSON in ClickHouse. But there's also the regex functions, as I mentioned, and extracting data from regex as well. There's a new variant type that allows you to basically have multiple data types per column as well, which allows having sort of a just allows to have a different sort of data type structure on the fields as they get read. So yeah, I find that working with JSON as a string works really well, and then extracting that using a view is a really good approach to working with unstructured data, especially with JSON. I don't know, Derek, maybe if there's anything else, I might just call out Derek, or even Shiv as well, if you have anything else to add to that. It's a very sort of big question.
Maybe just a couple more. So first of all, we're going to rewrite the how we process JSON. So some of you may know that we have the experimental object type, so that will go away. But we only replicate that when we have the semi-structured column type that is dependent on a new data type called variant data type that we have released a few versions ago. That will form as the building block before we add on the semi-structured data type. So watch out for that. That's going to help us process JSON in a very efficient manner. The current experimental JSON type is not so much, which is why we are putting in effort to improve ourselves and replace that feature. So that's all I have to add.
Yeah, so if I had to use JSON today, I would probably, like John described, put in JSON as a string, and some of the important columns I would probably bubble it up and put it as individual columns where I know that I'm definitely going to query a lot. So that would be my preferred approach.
Great.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Derek, to you, is ClickHouse a good fit for use cases where data or rows are mutable? We have a use case where we want to use ClickHouse for storing e-commerce orders or analytics, which goes through its life cycle, during which the orders get updated. Since ClickHouse does not provide updates, what's the workaround?
So ClickHouse do support updates, and that's through mutation auto table updates. However, we do not recommend that you run it super frequently, not as if this is a OLTP database, it's an OLAP. But however, we have specialized table engine just for you. You are free to use replacing merge tree or collapsing merge tree or different variant of the merge tree family for that kind of use case. So it will help you handle updates as well as deletes. And in the case of collecting merge tree, that will help you do deletes in a efficient manner.
Okay, great. Thanks, Derek. And Shiv, now we're coming to you. I have a 5-node cluster, 3 ClickHouse Keeper, and 2 clockwise data node, 48 gigs RAM, 12-core CPU server. Can you share an installation guide, step-by-step custom instruction for this setup for POC with petabyte of living data as a replacement to Elk Stack?
Wow, like Johnny said, this is a long question. So you could contact me, and I can provide more details. But I will provide you a few things on my experience. So for the setup guide, we at Nutanix use the alternative Kubernetes operator. That's been quite good if you're operating on Kubernetes. And then it does have a lot of different ways. I can assure you that it does work well. So that is the setup guide that I would provide. But there are a bunch of setup guides available on the ClickHouse documentation. You can use either of them. Or if you don't want to manage yourself, you can, of course, use ClickHouse Cloud. ELK stack to ClickHouse is actually quite a popular use case. So I did find a couple of blogs that were very useful to me when we were doing the similar things. And I will put the links in the chat. For instance, the one that you should definitely refer for numbers is the blog from Zeroda. I'll put the link in the chat again. But they claimed that after putting the log-based data from ELK stack to ClickHouse, they had 20x less disk space. In their benchmarks, they found that pretty much 1/3 number of CPU cores, hardly 60%, 70% of RAM that they needed to use. So it was quite cheaper. But you look at Zeroda's success story, you could look at Uber's success story. Then there are a bunch more. So there's a lot of information out there on this topic. You can just do a simple Google search and find those. Those were of a lot of use to us. So we started on a place where a lot of things have already figured out, and then we customize it for our own. And lastly, in particular, I would refer Uber's blog on how they replaced ELK with ClickHouse. Zeroda's blog is quite good as well. There's one from Cloudflare as well. They have a lot of scale, and they have put in a lot of different things where they had problems with ELK stack and how ClickHouse was useful in solving those. So yeah, there's a lot out on the internet. I'll put those 3 links that I mentioned. But yeah, let me know if you have more questions later while you are on this journey.
Yeah, I agree, Shiv. That Zeroda blog has driven a lot of our users to try ClickHouse. It's excellent. So I certainly recommend reading that. Don't go far, Shiv. We've got another one for you. In a typical microservice scenario, do we need to pool the connections with each service? If so, is there a limit on the number of active connections?
This is again a sort of loaded question. So if I have to talk about a connection pool, I would definitely use it with ClickHouse in my application. I would keep a limit. But then today, the way we use ClickHouse is that we have, in one of the setups, we have a 5-node cluster. And you could potentially dedicate a few nodes only for distributed tables, but that's not what we do. So the blog that I just referred in the previous question from Uber has a setup for that. And we actually tried that and it works. But our setup is pretty simple right now. We're just starting on our ClickHouse story. Last 2 quarters or so, we have been evaluating ClickHouse and we're very happy with the results we're seeing. So we have 5 nodes. Every node has distributed table as well as the data. We have a load balancer that directs the inserts or queries to any of these 5 nodes. And there the distributed table will take care of redirecting things properly. So if you can just randomize and spread out across nodes, you should be fine. It shouldn't be a roadblock in the beginning. Hasn't been for us. So that's not where we are spending our energies. We are mostly just trying to understand ClickHouse better every day and optimize it, our application and design patterns to use ClickHouse in the best ways. So there is a settings page in the ClickHouse documentation. You can look for, just do a Control F on connections or connection pool. And I was looking for it for this question. I could find a lot of options. So you can check on the link that I just put in the documentation.
Great, thanks, Shiv. Derek, we've got one for you. How does ClickHouse Cloud do shard rebalancing, if it does?
Well, the good news is that it doesn't, because it's not required. The reason is because ClickHouse Cloud uses a shared nothing architecture, so there's no concept of shard or shard rebalancing. The reason is because data is only stored once in the object store, S3 for AWS and GCS for GCP, and all the replicas will have access to this one single copy of the data. So sharding is only necessary in an on-prem setup where you cannot fit all the data in one single disk, right? So you have to divide the data across multiple shards and also multiple disks, excuse me. And hence, you will need to rebalance when you add additional shards. So yes, ClickHouse Cloud does not require shards or shard rebalancing.
Great, thanks, Derek. Johnny, we're coming back to you. Our plan with ClickHouse is to have our application write to Postgres and sync it to ClickHouse so that we can do fast aggregated queries through ClickHouse. How does this compare performance-wise to, say, caching with Redis? Also, is this approach right, or should we be writing directly?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a couple in there. I think if we tackle the Postgres sync question first, it's not so much a Postgres sync to ClickHouse. It's kind of like almost like a mini migration, I would probably call it, and say that there's certain workloads in Postgres that you can have that write directly to ClickHouse. And there's a couple of different ways that if you're doing an RDS instance in AWS or something like that, or you can get the data to S3, for example. That's probably the best way to sync the data. You could use a ClickHouse sort of Postgres integration or table engine to go and pull that data out from Postgres. That could be another way to pull that data through, and it's not really a sync, but you could definitely get that data into ClickHouse. Yeah, or you could use other tools to do a mini migration from ClickHouse from Postgres into ClickHouse as well for certain functions or aggregations that you want to obviously serve out to an end user to run those aggregations. So that's the first part, is really around syncing the data to do those fast aggregation queries. And then how do you compare that to Redis? Redis is really fast. It's absolutely very fast, but it is a cache. It's just a key value store that basically you can access and offload data to, but you still have to create those aggregated queries somewhere. So if you're doing that in Redis and then you need in Postgres, then you need to sync that data to Redis in the key value store. That's probably a little bit of work to do that. The other way to do that is to just run the aggregations in ClickHouse directly, which should be quite fast and efficient, and serve the data directly from ClickHouse using REST API, or build a service to consume that data from ClickHouse directly. So that's and from a performance perspective, absolutely. We can go back to ClickBench and running those performance tests on top of ClickHouse for lots of concurrent users accessing the data for all the good reasons of all the compression that comes out of the disk, and being able to consume that concurrently. So there was a bit in there, so syncing data, and then also the performance when it comes to Redis. Last thing I'll just add to that is with ClickHouse, you can rewrite the queries as well. So you can have many users and have dynamic queries essentially if you needed to. Whereas with Redis, you still have to produce those queries somewhere and then sync them over to Redis. Whereas with ClickHouse, it's a kind of all-in-one offload type solution from Postgres.
Right. Thanks, Johnny. I've got another one for you here. In one of the slides, it was mentioned to avoid using select star instead of select average something. Just want to hear average is referring to function or what it is. The next question is related to sharding, like where to define it. While inserting, it will expect a sharding key.
Okay. I'm not too sure. I think, yeah, definitely the average obviously is an average function. That's probably what it was referring to in the slides, if it's related back to the slide that we mentioned earlier around select average something and what is the best performance to run with ClickHouse. But that's definitely, yeah, just the standard average function. There was nothing nothing special about the average function there. I think that's what I was saying. And regarding the sharding, maybe I'll don't know, Derek, might get your
So let me jump
assistance
in
with.
on. Yep, let me jump in on the question on sharding. So in sharding, so when you have multiple shards, you need to create a distributor table so that any inserts going through the distributor table gets passed through what we call a sharding key. So the distributor table will then, based on the sharding key, the calculation of the results, pass on the data parts to be stored on each of the individual shards according to the result of a sharding key. So that's on the insert part. So on the select part, same thing. If you were to select from a distributor table, it will be forwarding the query to each of these shards, run the result before sending back the partial results back to the initiator node, and then doing a final aggregation before returning the results. So that's for insert and select, and you need to use a distributor table for that.
Yeah, thanks, Derek.
Thanks, Derek. Shiv, I've got one for you here. In the case of time series use case 1, is there any built-in downsampling utility to store data based on granularity? 2, is there any utility for existing data migration from InfluxDB to ClickHouse? Does ClickHouse support line protocol, like using Telegraph for collecting metrics?
Okay, so I'll take all of them one by one. For the first question, downsampling, what we do today is we used metallized views. So this is by far, so I've used a lot of databases, and this is by far the most convenient way I have found to sort of move data, downsample them, or aggregate them in any different way and move it to another storage. So with metallized views, what happens is you can specify an SQL query, and as you insert data on your table, there will be a separate storage created, a separate table created, and that sort of SQL in between will be executed to sort of put data in a different format there. So that's what we do for downsampling today, and it's very powerful. As far as migration to ClickHouse from an InfluxDB or any other time series is concerned, in my opinion, ClickHouse is not a straight swap for Influx or Prometheus, Victoria Metrics, any of those time series databases. But then ClickHouse is in general an amazing database. So what you can do is, and in fact, we do this today as well. We put a lot of time series data as part of the tables. That's not sort of one-to-one. You will have to spend some time on the schema. You'll have to see how exactly you can put data and make sure you use the right compression formats and stuff. But if I had to move from an InfluxDB to ClickHouse today, what I would do is I would sort of have an ingestion pipeline that continues to ingest to InfluxDB, and probably green-blue kind of deployment strategy where the same ingestion pipeline would probably also insert to a ClickHouse-based cluster. And I would sort of keep refining schema on the ClickHouse side, do better indexing, order by partitioning key and stuff like that. And over time, because time series data is typically has limited shelf life, at one point of time, I would have data in both the places, and the influx pipeline, I would just cut to make sure that ClickHouse is the only one once I'm satisfied with ClickHouse. But I would probably move that way instead of just trying to use a tool to move data from here to there. That would probably not work as easily because it's not a time series database when you work with ClickHouse, although it does really well when you put your schemas properly. For Telegraph, if I understood the question properly, there is a plugin in Telegraph that allows you to take the data as part of Telegraph plugin and send it to ClickHouse as destination. So I'll put that link in the chat right away. So here are the notes for all the 3 questions, and you have a link to the Telegraph plugin there as well.
Right. Thanks, Shiv. Johnny, coming back to you, is it possible to have 30 days of data, hot data in ClickHouse, and then offload older data, cold data, to S3 or data lake? This is to save costs ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of different ways. So obviously, if you use ClickHouse Cloud, it's already using S3 anyway. So you've got the compression and storage. So one copy of the data, it lives on S3 already. So that's already there using ClickHouse Cloud with shared managed tree. So you don't really have to offload it. You still get all the benefits of S3. Or you can use essentially like create a TTL on your create statement on your table, and then migrate your data as part of the TTL as part of a storage policy as well off to S3 automatically. So you can sync that off when you need to, and you can also re-import it again when you need to. But yeah, you can do that using the S3 function and a table DDL of your table, and you can write that to S3 automatically. So two options there.
Great. Thanks, Johnny. We've got one more question here, and then maybe I'll look into the chat to see if anyone's asked any additional ones. But Derek, maybe you could help us with this one. Looking to POC Cloud for cost optimization and cost control based on observability and anomaly management for multi-cloud. Any pointers towards this direction with ClickHouse? Currently done via ETL to Snowflake N via internal tools by data scrubbing N with support of cloud native cost advisors.
All right, a very loaded question. So I'll just put two different section. One is on storage, the other one is on compute, right? So for storage, ClickHouse does storage compression really well. So so if you have like data, let's say stored in a CSV, TSV, JSON, maybe in a object store, you can expect at least like 10x compression from the usual data formats, like the one that I've just mentioned. So this saves you the storage cost upfront. On the other one, which is compute, right? So ClickHouse is really efficient in all our aggregation algorithms. So all the functions. So first of all, like ClickHouse has hundreds and hundreds of functions that you can use. So it helps you to avoid writing those lengthy SQL. You just have to use a function that is pre-built, and you're done. And all these algorithms are very efficiently implemented. In fact, we only allow improvements to be checked into our code. If there's regression, you will not see them because it basically just get rejected. So all in all, storage very efficiently done through compression. Compute functions are implemented very efficiently, and this is how we can allow milliseconds computation over billions of rows. Back to you, Paul.
Okay, great. Thanks, Derek. A couple questions have come through the chat that we haven't been able to address yet. One is referring to ClickBench, our benchmarking tool. The benchmarking is on what data sets? Can you please provide further sights into it?
Yeah, I might take this one, Derek. I don't think there's a specific data set per se. I think it's anything that you want to run against the specific database there. You can insert and create your own data sets as well, and use that to basically insert the data and simulate data into a table where you can query from that table. I don't know if there's a specific data. Maybe Derek, you might know, but I'm not sure if there's a specific data set. I was actually looking through the docs now.
That's right. So ClickHouse benchmark, which is the tool. Obviously, you can use it and run it and put in your queries and obviously your data. But for the one which is the benchmarking that we put in, which is called ClickBench, that is using the hits data set. So if you go to the website benchmark.clickhouse.com, if you scroll down all the way down, you will see over 40 queries, and if you hover over them, you get to see the full query that was being executed, and you can see that the table that is being used is actually called hits. I think I have also put in a link on the hits data set, so you are free to reproduce whatever you see there.
Okay, great. Thank you, both of you. The next one, I have noticed for fixed string ClickHouse append null characters if string is of less length than mentioned in fixed string. So using string in place of fixed string, how will search get impacted? Also, is there any way to remove null character on existing data?
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, if you are using a fixed string, then we really expect you to provide the string of that length, right? If you want a fixed string of like 10 characters, then be sure to put in 10 characters, nothing more, nothing less, because otherwise it will be inefficient to do that. And secondly, if you put in the number of characters fewer than the one that you define, then ClickHouse is going to automatically put in null values. It really it is what it is, because we do not want to we want to keep it to a fixed string, which is why if it's anything fewer, we will put in the null character. I don't believe there's a way to remove them. However, there might be a setting where the null value, when you do your select, you might be able to remove them and have it being represented as an empty string instead of a /n, which can be ugly and not what you want. That's the answer to the first one. Let me see, any way to remove? Yeah, so there might be a setting to remove that. And it's not so much of removing, it's more of a replacing, such that it show up as empty string or a white space. But in all, I want to put in a warning to say, like, if only use fixed string when you are very sure that the string that you use is of certain length. Otherwise, feel free to use string or low cardinality string, depending on your use case. So you need to be very clear on why you want to use fixed string in this case.
And there was a more generic question that talked about the performance impact between using a fixed string. I missed that one. Can you address that piece?
Yeah, sure. So again, if you are only putting in a fixed string, meaning you say like fixed string of the same size, then it's going to be the most efficient, right? So if anything more, anything less, then that it's very likely to reduce the efficiency, and we have that statement being put up in our documentation as well. The statement goes like, fixed string type is efficient when the data has a length precisely of n bytes, right? So whatever size that you have put in place. Now, the second part of that statement is in other cases, it is likely to reduce efficiency. So as I said, if you know that they are all of a same size, use fixed string. Anything else, please do not use fixed string, because otherwise you get efficiency affecting it's going to affect your efficiency and performance for sure.
Great, thanks, Derek. I don't think that we have any additional questions beyond what we've addressed here. Oh, wait, here we go. We got a hot one. How reasonable is it to use merge tree engine instead of replacing merge tree engine if we can use async insert and the soft delete options in production environment? The use case is of frequent data writes and delete.
I can take the one.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, deletes are lesser though. Yeah. So if you know that you are going to have it depends on the ratio of deletes, right? So you can have, like, well, let's say 1 deletes per day. That's fine. Actually, you can use it as is. You can use lightweight deletes for sure. But if you have a lot of data, it depends on the amount of data that you're trying to delete as well. Because if you use the standard auto table delete, then it's going to trigger a mutation. What this means is that all the data parts have to be rewritten, right? So you can imagine the IO cost spiking, not to mention the other resources, memory, CPU as well. So, but if you are putting in lightweight deletes, that's going to help with the performance. But still, at the back end, we are just putting in a mask to say that, hey, we are not deleting the rows, but the next time you do a select, do not consider these rows. It is more efficient, but if you have a lot of deletes, it is always best to use replacing merge tree. And when you mention how reasonable it is to use merge tree, it all depends on your use case, how much deletes you are putting in. So we have cases where the customer wants to delete once every minute or even once every 10 seconds. So for these kind of cases, it's really much better to use a replacing merge tree so that you can allow the new data to be written to replace the previous one. Or in case of the real deletes, you can use collapsing merge tree, and then you put in the -1 sign to indicate which row you want to remove. So it all depends on use case. My guess is that you need to know your the ratio of like the inserts and also deletes. Run experiments to see what happens. Yeah, that would be my answer.
Great, thanks, Derek. Any last questions from the community out there? Okay, well, I think we're pretty good from the question standpoint. Again, wanted to thank Shiv and Johnny and Derek for addressing these for the folks that were unable to have them answered. And we want to announce that we're coming back. We will be back in Bangalore for our next meetup on May the 4th. You can take a snap of this QR code here and register. We're coming in earlier in the week as we're going to be one of the sponsors at the Kafka Summit. If for whatever reason you can't make it to the meetup, but you're heading to Kafka Summit, please come by and say hello. Johnny and I will be there. One of our product managers is flying in for this as well. So we look forward to doing more of a series of meetups this coming year. It's very clear that we need to invest more and spend more time in India. So if you're interested in speaking, please send an email through to Cheryl. I spoke with 2 different companies today in Bangalore that were very keen on talking. We've probably got about 8 to 10 of them that are lined up, but we'd like to have a mixed bag. So please do voice your opinions around what you'd like to hear, or if you can speak. And thank you. Again, you can always engage with us in the ClickHouse community Slack channel or via LinkedIn or GitHub as well. Also, too, don't forget that on our website, all of our training content is free and on demand for you to download. And there's a bunch of wonderful blog posts, some of which Shiv called out earlier. So please do let us know how we can help. We're here. We're going to be back in India more often, and we'd love to hear from you. So thanks, everyone. We really appreciate it, and see you soon.